lonely rancher for years, until Apache girl said, "Let me feel you tonight." John McAllister had spent nearly 10 years in the wide, sun-baked plains of Arizona, living alone on the ranch that had been in his family for generations. The house was old, made of weathered wood and stone, with a roof that had seen more storms than John cared to count. Every morning the rooster crowed before sunrise, pulling him from his heavy, deep sleep, and he would step outside to the soft chill of the desert morning. The sky stretched endlessly, painted with shades of orange and pink that reflected off the mountains in the distance. The ranch was more than a home. It was a world in itself. There were fences to mend, gates to oil, and cattle to feed. The smell of hay mixed with the dry earth and the occasional aroma of fresh coffee filled the house each morning. John had learned to appreciate these small routines. They kept him grounded, kept the days moving, and gave his life a sense of purpose even when his heart felt heavy with solitude. He often remembered the life he had before, the laughter of friends and family, the warmth of conversation over long dinners, and the quiet, happy moments with his late wife. Those memories were comforting, but they also reminded him of the emptiness that now filled his home. The ranch had become his refuge, a place where he could escape the loneliness of the town. But it was also a cage of silence. The wind whistled across the plains, and the only other voices were the soft lowing of cattle or the occasional bark of a dog. John had always preferred working with his hands. There was a satisfaction in mending a fence, in knowing that each board, nail, and hinge was placed with care and effort. He rose before the sun, dressed in his worn jeans and a faded plaid shirt, and set out to begin the day's work. The horses, old and wise, would greet him quietly, noses nudging his hand as if to say, "Good morning, John." Each task, though physically demanding, brought him a sense of accomplishment. He felt alive when his body ached from honest labor, and his mind could focus on something tangible. Evenings were quiet. After a day of work, John would sit on the porch, rocking gently in his chair, watching the sun slip below the horizon. The sky darkened slowly, stars appearing one by one, like tiny lanterns in the night. He would sip his coffee, now cooled, and think about the people he had known. Sometimes he would talk to his wife in his mind, telling her about the day, the ranch, the cattle, and the wind. It was a habit that gave him comfort, a way to fill the silence with memories rather than emptiness. The townspeople knew him as the quiet rancher, a man who kept to himself and spoke only when necessary. Children would wave as they passed the long dirt road leading to the ranch, and he would wave back with a gentle nod. There were visits from the local grocer or the occasional neighbor needing help with a stubborn fence or a broken wheel. John was always ready to lend a hand, but he never lingered. Socializing felt strange after so many years alone. He had grown used to the rhythm of his own company, the steady beat of work and solitude. But solitude came with its own challenges. Nights were the hardest. The quiet could be deafening, broken only by the howl of a distant coyote or the whispering of the wind through the mesquite trees. At times, John would lie awake staring at the ceiling, thinking about the life he once had and the life he now led. There was a longing for companionship, for conversation, for someone to share the small, beautiful moments of life. Yet, he had grown accustomed to the rhythm of being alone, finding comfort in the familiarity of the land and his daily routine. John also had a deep love for the land itself. The desert was harsh, often unforgiving, but it held a beauty that few people understood. He knew where the water holes were, where the wildflowers bloomed in spring, and which trails led to the best views of the sunset. Sometimes he would ride his horse along the winding paths, feeling the wind rush past him, and for a brief moment he felt free. The land was patient, unchanging, and it had a way of reminding him that life, even in its quietest moments, had its own rhythm and beauty. Despite the peace that came from routine, there were moments of sadness that crept in quietly. He missed laughter that came easily, shared meals, and the comfort of another presence in the house. He missed waking up to someone who cared whether he had slept well, or someone who would quietly join him on the porch as the stars appeared in the night sky. These thoughts were fleeting at times, but they lingered in the back of his mind like shadows in the corners of the ranch. Even with the loneliness, John found small joys that made life feel full. He would whistle while mending fences, take pride in the health of his cattle, and feel satisfaction in a job well done. Birds would visit the feeders he set outside the kitchen window, and he would watch them for hours, marveling at the simple beauty of their flight. Sometimes he would hum an old tune, one his wife had loved, letting it fill the silence of the house. It was in these small moments that he felt connected to life, even when he felt far from people. As years went by, John's routine became a kind of meditation. He learned to enjoy the quiet, to find meaning in his labor, and to appreciate the beauty of the desert. Yet, underneath it all, there was a small, persistent yearning, a hope that one day someone might cross the wide plains of his life and bring warmth to his quiet world. He didn't know who that person might be or when they would come, but the thought lingered like a distant star, faint but unwavering. The ranch was more than a home. It was a part of him, shaped by his hands, his heart, and his memories. It had given him strength in his solitude and a sense of purpose when life felt empty. John McAllister was a man who had learned to live with himself, to find peace in work and nature, and to face the quiet desert nights with courage. But even in the midst of routine and solitude, the human heart holds a longing for connection, for someone to share the beauty and hardship of life. And somewhere in the distance, beyond the mountains and the open plains, life had a way of surprising even the most solitary of hearts. John's days continued as they had for years, filled with work, quiet mornings, and long stretches of solitude. Yet something was about to change, something subtle at first, that would ripple through his carefully ordered life. One afternoon, as the sun hung high in the sky, painting the desert in bright gold and shadows, John noticed movement near the far edge of his property. At first he thought it was a deer or a stray dog, common visitors to the ranch. But as he squinted against the sunlight, he saw a figure, tall, confident, moving with a grace that seemed out of place among the dry brush and cacti. The woman paused and looked directly at him. Her dark hair was braided neatly down her back, and her eyes shone with curiosity and a quiet strength. She carried herself with a calmness that seemed almost regal, yet there was a spark of mischief in her gaze. John, caught off guard, felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in years. Curiosity, followed closely by a nervous tension he couldn't explain. For a long moment, they simply watched each other. The desert wind rustled the dry grass, carrying the faint scent of sage and earth. John realized that he had not expected anyone to visit his ranch, not in a decade. Visitors were rare and usually from the town, looking to sell something or ask for help. But this woman, she was different. There was something about her presence that made the wide, empty ranch feel less lonely, almost alive. She finally spoke, her voice soft but clear, carrying over the distance. "Hello," she said. "I hope I'm not intruding." John's throat felt dry. He hesitated, unsure how to respond. "You're not intruding," he said finally, his voice rough from disuse. "What brings you out here?" "I've been passing through," she replied. I wanted to see the land. I've heard stories about this ranch. John nodded slowly. He was used to strangers being polite or overly curious, but there was an honesty in her eyes that made him trust her immediately. You've come a long way, he said, gesturing to the wide, dusty plains that stretched in every direction. It's not easy to find your way out here without a map or a guide. She smiled, and it was the kind of smile that warmed the air around her. I like to explore, she said simply. I enjoy learning about places, about people, about lives different from my own. There was a pause, a quiet that was not uncomfortable but filled with unspoken thoughts. John realized he had not had a conversation like this in years, someone to talk to, not about chores or weather, but about life itself. He felt a strange excitement, mixed with the caution of a man who had grown used to his solitude. I'm John, he said finally, extending a hand. John McAllister. This is my ranch. She took his hand, firm but gentle. I'm Lonnie, she said. Lonnie White Eagle. Her name carried a story, John thought. There was pride and strength in it. He felt the weight of years of loneliness slowly beginning to lift, replaced by a spark of connection. Well, Lonnie, he said, welcome to the McAllister Ranch. Over the next few weeks, Lonnie began to visit more often. Sometimes she came to help with chores, other times simply to watch the sunset or ask questions about the land. She was eager to learn, and John, though cautious at first, found himself enjoying her company. He explained how to tend the cattle, how to fix fences, and how to read the signs of the desert, the tracks of animals, the signs of approaching weather, the best places to find water. Lonnie listened carefully, her dark eyes wide with interest. She asked questions that made John think in ways he hadn't in years. She was curious, clever, and fearless, willing to try tasks that even seasoned ranch hands might avoid. She climbed fences, helped gather cattle, and even learned to ride one of the older horses with patience and care. John watched her from a distance at first, unsure how to feel, but he couldn't deny the admiration and warmth growing in his heart. Despite her eagerness, she was respectful. She did not overstep boundaries, nor did she seem afraid of him. She laughed at his dry humor and even teased him gently about his old-fashioned ways. John found himself smiling more than he had in years, his laughter returning slowly but surely. The ranch, which had always been quiet and methodical, began to feel alive with conversation and energy. One afternoon, as they worked together to mend a broken gate, John noticed how naturally her hands moved, skilled and confident. You've done this before? He asked, raising an eyebrow. Here and there, she replied with a shrug, a playful smile tugging at her lips. I've had to be handy. Life teaches you quickly if you pay attention. John chuckled. I suppose it does. He paused, looking at her closely. She was unlike anyone he had ever met, strong, self-assured, and yet unafraid to show curiosity and kindness. It was a combination that both intrigued and unsettled him. He hadn't felt this kind of connection in years, not since the days before his wife passed. Days turned into weeks, and their friendship deepened. Lonnie would come by to help, but more often, she came simply to talk. They would sit on the porch after a long day, sipping cold water or coffee, sharing stories of their pasts. John told her about his life on the ranch, about his late wife, and about the struggles and joys of living alone. Lonnie shared her own stories, speaking of her heritage, her family, and her experiences growing up in a nearby Apache community. Through these stories, John realized how much he had missed the simple act of sharing. Talking, laughing, and even the quiet moments of sitting together brought a comfort he had thought was lost forever. The walls he had built around himself were slowly crumbling, brick by brick, with every conversation and shared laugh. It wasn't just the company that affected him. It was her perspective. Lonnie had a way of seeing life that was both practical and full of wonder. She noticed the small details, the way a flower leaned toward the sun, the tracks of a rabbit in the dirt, the subtle changes in the wind before a storm. John, who had worked the land for years, found himself learning from her observations, appreciating the beauty he had overlooked in routine. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains and the sky turned a deep shade of orange, Lonnie turned to him with a thoughtful expression. "I like this place," she said quietly. "There's a peace here, even when it's hard and lonely. It feels real." John felt a lump in his throat. He realized she understood the ranch, and him in a way few people ever had. "It's been my whole life," he said softly. "It's been lonely at times, but it's mine. And I suppose it's better when someone appreciates it too." She smiled, reaching out to lightly touch his arm. "I appreciate it. I appreciate you." The moment lingered, unspoken yet powerful. It was the first time in many years that John felt the stirrings of something more than friendship, something hopeful, something that promised change. Yet he did not rush it. He had learned the value of patience, of letting life unfold naturally. As the weeks continued, Lonnie's visits became a cherished part of John's routine. The ranch, once a place of quiet solitude, now echoed with conversation, laughter, and shared effort. John began to look forward to her arrival each day, a feeling he had thought he would never experience again. And though he did not yet know what the future held, he felt a flicker of hope, a gentle warmth that suggested that even the quietest hearts could find companionship in the most unexpected ways. For the first time in nearly a decade, John McAllister realized that life on the ranch could be more than routine and solitude. It could be shared, filled with friendship, laughter, and perhaps, in time, something deeper. And as he watched Lonnie ride across the fields one evening, her silhouette strong against the setting sun, he felt the faint but undeniable promise of a new chapter in his long, quiet life. The days on the ranch. John's life, once measured by the rising and setting of the sun, had begun to change in subtle, meaningful ways. Lonnie's visits, once occasional, had grown more frequent. She arrived with a bright smile and a curiosity that seemed to awaken parts of the ranch and John's heart that had been dormant for years. One morning, John noticed a change in her demeanor as she walked across the dusty path toward the barn. Her usual calm confidence was paired with a quiet excitement, and the way she looked at him made him feel something he had not experienced in a long time. "Good morning, John," she said, her voice carrying the warmth of the early sun. "I thought I could help you with the cattle today." John nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "I could use an extra pair of hands. Let's start with the south pasture." As they worked side by side, gathering cattle and checking fences, John realized how much her presence had changed the rhythm of his work. Tasks that had once felt solitary and monotonous now carried a sense of shared purpose. Her laughter echoed across the fields when a calf stumbled or a fence gate refused to close. And John found himself laughing too, the sound unfamiliar but welcome. They shared stories as they worked. Lonnie spoke of her childhood, growing up learning the traditions and skills of her community. She told him about the elders who had taught her about the land, the animals, and the importance of patience and respect for nature. John listened intently, fascinated by her experiences and impressed by the wisdom she carried at such a young age. "I never realized how much I could learn from someone so young," John said one afternoon as they rested under the shade of an old mesquite tree. Sweat ran down their faces, and the sun burned hot on their backs. But neither seemed to mind. You have a way of seeing things I've overlooked all these years. Lonnie smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Sometimes it just takes a fresh pair of eyes, she said softly, and someone willing to pay attention. The friendship between them began to deepen. John found himself anticipating her visits, looking forward to the sound of her voice and the way she moved through the ranch with ease and confidence. He shared more about his life, including memories of his late wife. Talking about her had always been difficult, but with Lonnie it felt easier, almost natural. She listened without judgment, offering comfort and understanding in ways that surprised him. Despite the growing closeness, John felt a sense of hesitation. His life had been quiet for so long that the idea of change, of letting someone new into his world, felt both thrilling and terrifying. There were moments when he would catch himself staring at her and quickly look away, reminding himself to maintain the careful boundaries he had built over the years. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, Lonnie and John were sitting on the porch, sipping water and watching the cattle settle for the night. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with unspoken thoughts and a sense of connection that neither had experienced before. "You know," Lonnie said after a while, "I've never met anyone like you, John. You're strong, patient, and, I don't know, steady in a way that feels safe." John felt a warmth spread through him at her words. He looked at her, the fading light highlighting her features, and realized how much he had come to care for her. "And I've never met anyone like you," he admitted quietly. "You've brought life back to this place, back to me." The days grew longer and the bond between them continued to strengthen. They worked together, shared meals, and spent evenings watching the stars appear one by one. John began to notice the small ways she had become part of his life, the way she remembered which herbs he liked in his meals, the way she laughed at his corny jokes, and the way she seemed to understand him without words. Yet, as their connection deepened, so did the tension. John was unsure how to navigate the growing feelings he had for her. He cared deeply, but years of solitude had taught him caution. He feared that expressing his emotions too soon might disrupt the fragile balance they had created. Lonnie, on the other hand, seemed equally aware of the unspoken bond between them. She would catch his eye at unexpected moments, a playful smile or a knowing look that hinted at something more than friendship. One afternoon, as they repaired a section of fence that had been damaged by a recent storm, John noticed how the sun glinted off her hair, making it seem almost golden. She worked diligently, her movements precise and confident, and he felt an ache in his chest that he could not ignore. It was not just admiration, it was something deeper, something that had been lying dormant within him for years. After finishing the fence, they sat on a nearby rock, catching their breath. The silence was broken only by the distant calls of birds and the rustling of the wind through the grass. Lonnie turned to him, her eyes serious for the first time in days. "John, can I ask you something?" "Of course," he replied, his voice steady but his heart racing. She hesitated for a moment before speaking. "Do you ever feel lonely?" John considered the question carefully. He had spent years in solitude, but he had learned to find comfort in it. Yet, looking at her now, he realized how much he had missed companionship. "I have for a long time." Lonnie nodded, her expression softening. "I can see that," she said gently. "And I think sometimes it's okay to let someone in, even after a long time." Her words lingered in the air, and John felt a mixture of relief and fear. He wanted to reach out to bridge the distance that had always existed between him and the world. But he was cautious. He had been hurt before, and the idea of opening his heart again was daunting. The following days brought a subtle shift in their relationship. There was a newfound intimacy in their conversations, a quiet understanding that went beyond words. They shared more about their pasts, their dreams, and their fears. John began to notice how much he relied on her presence, not just for help with the ranch, but for emotional support and companionship. One evening, after a long day of work, Lonnie suggested they take a walk along the edge of the property. The sky was painted with hues of pink and purple, and the air was cool with the approaching night. They walked side by side, the silence between them comfortable and familiar. "John," Lonnie said softly, "I feel like we understand each other in a way that few people do. Don't you?" He looked at her, his heart pounding. "I do," he admitted. "I've never felt this way in years. You've brought something back into my life that I thought I had lost forever." Her hand brushed against his, not intentionally, but enough to send a shiver through him. He wanted to reach out, to hold her hand, but he stopped himself, unsure if it was too soon. Yet, the moment was electric, charged with a silent acknowledgement of the bond growing between them. The following week, their connection continued to evolve. Lonnie's visits were filled with laughter, work, and shared moments of quiet reflection. John found himself anticipating her presence more than anything else. He noticed the way she looked at him when she thought he wasn't paying attention, the way her smile lit up even the dullest of days, and the way she seemed to understand his thoughts before he spoke them. But along with the joy came uncertainty. John struggled with his feelings, unsure how to proceed without disrupting the delicate balance of their friendship. He worried that expressing his emotions too soon might scare her away or create tension. Yet deep down he knew that he could not ignore the connection growing between them. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the stars emerge, Lonnie turned to him with a gentle smile.
"John, I think we're becoming more than friends,"
she said quietly, her voice filled with warmth. John felt a rush of emotions, relief, joy, and a touch of fear. He nodded slowly, his heart full. "I think so too," he admitted, "and I don't want to let this slip away." In that moment, under the vast desert sky, John realized that his life was changing in ways he had never imagined. The ranch, once a place of solitude and routine, had become a space of connection, growth, and possibility. And with Lonnie by his side, he felt a sense of hope and anticipation for the future, something he had not felt in years. The days that followed were filled with laughter, shared work, and quiet moments of reflection. John began to embrace the changes in his life, realizing that companionship and love were not threats to his solitude, but rather additions that enriched it. Lonnie's presence had brought warmth, understanding, and a sense of belonging that he had longed for without realizing it. And as they continued to walk the ranch together, side by side, John felt a deep, unspoken truth. Life, even after years of quiet solitude, had a way of surprising those who remained open to it. As the days turned into weeks, John could feel the quiet rhythm of his life shifting more profoundly than ever. Lonnie had become not only a companion, but a presence that made every moment feel fuller, brighter, and unexpectedly alive. The ranch, once a place of routine solitude, now hummed with energy, the sound of her laughter mixing with the lowing of cattle, the rhythmic creak of gates, and the soft rustle of the wind through the tall desert grass. One late afternoon, the sun was just beginning to dip behind the distant mountains, painting the sky with hues of orange, rose, and purple. John was finishing repairs on a broken fence near the northern pasture, sweat glistening on his forehead, when he noticed Lonnie approaching with a purposeful stride. There was a softness in her eyes, but also a spark of confidence that made John's heart skip a beat. "John," she called, her voice clear and warm over the gentle breeze. "I was hoping we could take a walk tonight. Just the two of us." John paused, leaning on his tool, and felt a rush of emotion he hadn't expected. He had grown cautious over the past decade, careful to guard his heart. But Lonnie, she had a way of easing that caution, of making him feel safe, while also drawing him closer. "Of course," he said finally, his voice low but steady. "Lead the way." They walked together across the open land, the golden light of sunset bathing everything in a magical glow. The air was filled with the scent of dry earth, sage, and the faint aroma of wildflowers that grew near a hidden creek. For the first time in years, John felt a sense of peace that went beyond the comfort of routine. It was a peace born from shared presence, mutual understanding, and a quiet, growing affection. Lonnie stopped at a large rock near the edge of the creek, brushing a strand of hair from her face. She turned to him, her expression soft but serious. "John, there's something I want to tell you." John's heart tightened in anticipation. He had sensed the tension between them for weeks, the unspoken feelings that lingered in glances, subtle touches, and quiet smiles. Now, standing in the fading light, he knew that a turning point had arrived. "What is it?" he asked gently. Lonnie took a deep breath, her eyes searching his. "I feel connected to you in a way I've never felt before," she said softly. "You've shown me patience, understanding, and kindness, and I want to be closer to you." John's chest tightened and he felt warmth spread through him, a mixture of relief, joy, and vulnerability. He had spent so long alone that the idea of allowing someone to enter his heart completely felt both thrilling and frightening. Yet he knew, in that quiet desert evening, that he could not turn away from this moment. "I feel the same, Lonnie," he admitted, his voice low, almost a whisper. "For months, I've felt something I couldn't name, something I didn't think I would ever feel again. You've brought life back into this ranch, back into me." She stepped closer, her hand brushing his arm lightly, a touch so gentle it sent a shiver down his spine. "Then, can we?" she began, her voice trailing off as she searched his eyes. John understood. He took her hand in his, holding it firmly but tenderly. "Yes," he said softly, "we can." For a long moment, they simply stood together, hands intertwined, hearts beating in quiet harmony. The desert around them seemed to hold its breath, as if acknowledging the significance of this turning point in both their lives. John felt a rush of gratitude, not just for the companionship Lonnie offered, but for the courage he had found within himself to accept it. As twilight deepened and stars began to appear, the conversation shifted naturally, flowing with ease and warmth. They spoke of dreams for the future, of hopes for the ranch, and of the small joys that made life meaningful. Lonnie listened intently as John shared stories of his late wife, of the struggles and triumphs of running the ranch alone, and of the quiet loneliness that had once defined his existence. She offered understanding, encouragement, and gentle humor, reminding him that life could be both beautiful and shared. That night, as the moon rose high and cast a silver glow over the land, John and Lonnie sat on the porch, sipping water and watching the stars appear one by one. The ranch, once a place of routine solitude, now felt like a world alive with possibility. Every sound, the distant call of an owl, the whisper of the wind through the trees, the gentle movements of the cattle, seemed more vivid, more meaningful. "You've changed everything for me, John," Lonnie said softly, resting her head on his shoulder. "I never imagined I would find someone like you out here, in this quiet, lonely place." John felt a lump in his throat. He had long thought that his life was set, that the quiet ranch would be his only companion forever. Yet here she was, a presence that had brought warmth, laughter, and hope into his days. "And you've changed everything for me, Lonnie," he replied. "I thought I knew what life would be like, but you've shown me that there's more. There's joy, connection, and love, even in a place that once felt empty." They sat in silence for a while, allowing the moment to sink in. The desert night was calm, the sky filled with stars that seemed to stretch endlessly. John felt a sense of completeness he had not known in years, a feeling that life, despite its challenges and quiet moments of loneliness, could offer unexpected joy. Over the next few days, their bond grew stronger, more natural, and more intimate. They worked side by side on the ranch, sharing tasks and responsibilities with ease. Lonnie learned to anticipate John's movements and needs, and he began to trust her presence in ways he had never imagined. Small touches, a hand on the shoulder, a reassuring smile, a shared laugh, became part of their daily routine, reinforcing the connection that had blossomed between them. Yet even with this newfound closeness, John remained mindful of the slow pace that life on the ranch demanded. He knew that love, like the land, required patience, care, and attention. He wanted to ensure that their relationship grew naturally, without rushing, without pressure, and with respect for the lives they both had lived. Lonnie understood this, and together they navigated the delicate balance of friendship, trust, and deepening affection. One evening, as they watched the sun set behind the mountains, Lonnie turned to John with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever think about the future?" she asked softly. John considered her question, gazing at the vast expanse of desert before them. "I do," he admitted, "more than I used to. I used to think my future was set, quiet, routine, and alone. But now, with you here, I see possibilities I never imagined." Her hand found his again, and they walked slowly back toward the house, side by side. The world around them was quiet, yet filled with life, the gentle rustling of the trees, the distant cry of a night bird, and the soft murmur of the wind. In that moment, John realized that life had a way of offering second chances, even to those who had long given up hope. That night, as they sat together on the porch, John felt a profound sense of gratitude. He had lived years in solitude, but those years had prepared him for this, prepared him to recognize the beauty, kindness, and love that Lonnie brought into his life. The ranch, once a symbol of loneliness, had become a place of connection, growth, and promise. And in the quiet of the desert night, under a sky filled with stars, John McAllister allowed himself to feel something he had not dared to feel in a long time. Hope. Hope for the future, hope for companionship, and hope for love. The turning point had arrived, and with it, a new chapter of life that promised warmth, joy, and the possibility of shared dreams. As they finally went inside the house, John felt a sense of peace he had not known in years. The journey had not been easy, and the solitude of the past decade had left its mark. But he understood now that life had a way of bringing the right people into the right place at the right time. And as he watched Lonnie move around the kitchen with ease and comfort, he knew that this was only the beginning of a story that would shape both their lives forever. The following weeks and months on the ranch felt like a gentle awakening for John. The days were no longer measured simply by the rising and setting sun or the work of tending cattle. Now each day carried a quiet anticipation, a sense of shared purpose, and a warmth that he had not known in over a decade. Lonnie's presence had become woven into every corner of his life, softening the edges of solitude and filling the ranch with laughter, conversation, and companionship. Mornings began with the soft sounds of birds outside the kitchen window, where Lonnie would already be preparing breakfast. The smell of fresh bread, eggs, and coffee drifted through the small house, mingling with the faint scent of sage and the dry earth. John, once accustomed to silence, now found joy in these small, shared moments. He would sit across from her at the worn wooden table, smiling as she told stories of her family or recounted small adventures from the town or nearby forests. The ranch itself seemed transformed. Tasks that once felt heavy and lonely were now lighter, even joyful, because they were shared. Fences were mended together, cattle were gathered as a team, and chores that had once been routine and monotonous now carried laughter and conversation. Lonnie had a keen eye for detail, and her help made life on the ranch not just easier, but richer. John realized how much he had taken for granted the simple act of companionship, the feeling of someone understanding your rhythm, anticipating your needs, and being quietly present. Evenings were especially precious. After a day of work under the blazing sun, John and Lonnie would often sit on the porch, rocking gently and watching the desert sky change colors as the sun sank behind the mountains. Sometimes they would talk for hours, sharing dreams, hopes, and fears. Other times they would sit in companionable silence, letting the wind and the soft calls of distant wildlife fill the air. These moments, once unimaginable to John, had become the heartbeat of his life. One particular evening, after a long day of tending to the fields and repairing fences, Lonnie turned to John with a thoughtful smile. "You know," she said softly, "I've learned more from this ranch and from you than I ever expected. You've shown me patience, the kind of steady strength that's hard to find." John felt a warmth spread through him. He reached for her hand, holding it gently. "And you've shown me what it means to truly share life with someone," he said quietly. "I thought I was meant to be alone, but you've reminded me that life is richer when it's shared." The bond between them grew stronger with each passing day. There was a natural rhythm to their companionship, a flow of give and take that made even the smallest tasks feel meaningful. They laughed when the cattle were stubborn or when a gate refused to close, and they celebrated small victories together, like a fence finally repaired or a calf safely returned to the herd. These moments, though simple, carried weight and significance. They were the building blocks of a shared life. As the seasons changed, so too did the landscape of the ranch. Spring brought new growth, wildflowers blooming in unexpected corners, and the soft green of fresh grass against the rugged desert earth. John and Lonnie spent hours together tending to the fields, planting small gardens, and creating spaces that reflected both their care and their shared vision. It was during these times that John realized how much he had missed, not just companionship, but the sense of building something meaningful alongside someone else. Summer brought long, sun-filled days, where the two of them worked from dawn until dusk, often ending the day exhausted but content. They would sit on the porch as the sky turned shades of deep pink and gold, sharing meals and stories while the world around them grew quiet. John often found himself marveling at how much joy could exist in the simple rhythms of life when shared with someone you care about deeply. The connection between John and Lonnie extended beyond daily routines. They shared quiet walks along the ridgelines of the ranch, exploring hidden trails and watching sunsets from vantage points that revealed the vastness of the desert. Lonnie introduced John to stories and traditions from her heritage, explaining the significance of certain plants, the stories of the stars, and the importance of listening to the land. John absorbed these lessons eagerly, feeling that each story and each teaching added a layer of meaning to his life. One evening, as the moon rose high and cast a silver glow over the ranch, John found himself watching Lonnie quietly. She moved about the yard with ease and confidence, tending to the smaller chores, humming softly to herself. In that moment, he felt a deep gratitude, not just for her presence, but for the way life had guided him to this point. He realized that he had spent years preparing, in a way, for this companionship, learning patience, learning to care for the land, and learning to be open to love again. Their relationship was not without challenges, of course. Life on the ranch remained physically demanding, and there were moments of frustration when cattle wandered, fences broke, or unexpected storms threatened their work. Yet these challenges no longer felt overwhelming because they faced them together. John learned to rely on Lonnie's insight and her keen problem-solving skills, and she, in turn, learned from his years of experience and steady judgment. Together they discovered that partnership meant not just sharing joy, but also sharing responsibility, resilience, and the quiet courage required to face life's difficulties. Winter arrived with cool winds and crisp nights. Snow dusted the distant mountains, and the air held the scent of frost and pine. John and Lonnie spent long evenings by the fireplace, sharing stories and reflecting on the months that had passed. The house, once quiet and empty, now hummed with warmth, conversation, and the gentle rhythm of companionship. It was in these quiet nights that John truly understood how much his life had changed. The loneliness that had defined his existence for so long was replaced by a sense of belonging and shared purpose that brought profound satisfaction. John often found himself thinking about the future with hope and anticipation, rather than caution and solitude. He imagined long-term plans for the ranch, for their life together, and for the possibilities of shared adventures beyond the familiar landscapes. He no longer feared change. Instead, he welcomed it, knowing that Lonnie would be by his side to navigate whatever came next. One particularly bright morning, as they walked the property checking fences and inspecting the livestock, Lonnie turned to him and said, "John, I think we've built something special here. Not just the ranch, but us, our life together. And I hope we can keep building it, day by day, year by year." John smiled, squeezing her hand gently. "I couldn't agree more. This life, this ranch, and you, it's everything I could have hoped for, and more. I'm grateful for every moment we've shared, and excited for all that's to come." Their bond had become the heart of the ranch. Even the animals seemed to respond to the harmony between them, the way the cattle followed calmly when they walked together, and the horses nuzzled them with quiet familiarity. The land itself seemed alive with their shared care and attention, thriving under their combined effort and love. As spring returned once more, bringing new growth, the promise of longer days, and the soft fragrance of blooming wildflowers, John felt a deep, unshakable sense of contentment. Life had surprised him in ways he'd never imagined. He had endured years of solitude, hardship, and quiet reflection, only to discover that the right person, at the right time, could transform not only the heart, but the very world around it. John McAllister and Lonnie White Eagle had built more than a life together. They had built a partnership founded on respect, trust, shared labor, and love. Their days continued to be filled with work, laughter, and quiet reflection, but now they carried a lightness, a joy, and a sense of fulfillment that neither had expected. The ranch was no longer just a home or a refuge. It was a living, breathing testament to resilience, companionship, and the beauty of shared life. And as they sat on the porch one evening, the sky painted in streaks of orange and violet, watching the last of the sun dip behind the mountains, John knew with certainty that the years of loneliness had led him here, not to just a companion, but to a life filled with warmth, hope, and enduring love. The ranch had always been a place of labor and solitude, but now it was a place of connection, laughter, and shared dreams. John and Lonnie faced each day together, building a future that neither could have imagined alone, but both could cherish endlessly. The quiet ranch, once a symbol of isolation, had transformed into a home of life, love, and endless possibilities. And in the gentle rhythm of shared work, quiet evenings, and mutual care, John finally understood the deepest truth of all. Even after years of loneliness, life has a way of bringing love, hope, and companionship to those who are ready to embrace it.